All right, Thomas, thank you so very much. And thank you to everybody who has decided to join in this afternoon to hear about some of the one of the very most important topics you can have when being successful in the US market, having people on your payroll. My name is Charlotte Nytoft, and I help Danish businesses conquer the US market. And Thomas, you're on the West Coast.
I am ordinarily in Los Angeles, but I am joining you from a log cabin in Montana, just outside of Yellowstone National Park, which is the first national park in the U.S., by the way. It's 18 degrees outside, not centigrade. We're at 7,635 feet, which just goes to show you the diversity of the U.S. But I run a consulting firm based in California, which helps European companies with engagement with the US market. We focus on environmental sustainability, but work with a range of other companies as well. And I should say, for the purpose of this meeting, I am a California licensed attorney, and nothing that we discuss or nothing that I say in particular in this recording is to be taken as legal advice, and you should not assume that participating here creates an attorney-client privilege, an attorney-client relationship, rather, between any listeners and me.
Fantastic. So we have the disclaimer in its place as well. And actually, yes, it's a good idea that you are on a vacation, because I think when we were planning out our topics for this year's Tuesday talks, we discussed exactly this particular week, because it's a special week, because it's actually only one of two sort of national holidays that American employees are enjoying in the United States. It's sort of overarching the entire US, and that is the 4th of July, the Independence Day, and then it's Thanksgiving. And Thanksgiving is on Thursday, and it's also typically overarching. People are actually taking at least a Friday off, but then some are also having the opportunity to actually take off Monday through Wednesday as well. So that is one of the two very rare holidays in the United States. And how come, Thomas? Why is it so? Why is it that we have this lack of holidays in the United States?
Well, we have, historical, cultural reasons for this that date back to the founding of the country. The Puritan work ethic in this country is that work is good, more work is better, and a lot of work is fantastic. And one of the discussions I often have with people is people like, "Oh my God, you're from Denmark. Is it true? Do you really have 5 weeks vacation? What do you do with all that time?" And I flip it on them and I say, "Well, how do you have only 2 weeks and you don't even take it?"
Yeah.
And people are like, "Oh, that's a really good point." And it's really inculcated very early on in people in the US that vacation is like for recharging your batteries. But it's sort of like the underlying idea is like, if you're weak and you need recharging your batteries, and of course in Europe we see that very, very different.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also one of the you can say, the people or the companies that I advise on getting the framework established for actually becoming an employer in the United States. Because one thing is obviously to be a business owner in the United States, that's one thing, but then becoming an employer in the United States is a completely other steep learning curve.
Yes.
And I always recommend them, do go ahead and offer 2 or 3 weeks vacation in the United States, because it's also super difficult to have a headquarter back in Denmark with 5 weeks of vacation, and then your employees in the United States only have 2 weeks after like 2 years of employment. That is sort of, it creates an imbalance between the headquarter in Denmark and the employees on ground in the United States. So I always recommend
most definitely
to offer 3 or 2 weeks vacation. So you have a little bit of a better understanding. But it's also super important for the Danes really to then respect that particular these particular holidays that is sacred for the employee on the US ground, to actually take them off and really not being disturbed with all kinds of contacts from headquarters.
Most definitely. You can only imagine the uproar if an American company came into Denmark and decided, to have employees work on some of the Danish holidays that are considered sacred in Denmark. That would create an uproar and probably a media frenzy as well.
Exactly. And then it's also, sort of a good sign that you are in your log cabin up in Montana, because also another thing that I have experienced being you can say a aha for Danish businesses is you can say expectation of being able to work remotely. And I think it also correlates with the fact that there is so few holidays and so few days off, that you actually also as a upper management or upper salesperson actually do have the opportunity to work remotely, and to a very large extent do that in the United States. So it was so funny to actually experience the whole, oh wow, we can work remotely during the COVID. And I said, oh my God, Americans have done that forever. It's actually sort of it is called telework. What does it? It was because you could be able to work from wherever you had a telephone connection. I guess that was the original idea behind this. But Thomas, how have you experienced this as well? The American workers' ability to actually, and acceptance to actually work remotely, whereas sometimes the Europeans and the Danish businesses can be sort of a little like, oh, we would really like the people to come into the office, with our employees to be in the office. What is your experience on that angle?
It's a bit of a mixed bag, because certainly a lot of people, a lot of attorneys that I know are fine working remotely. A lot of them are able to do the things that they would ordinarily do in the office on Teams or Zoom or other things, and there are a bunch of different collaboration tools that existed before the pandemic as well that are used more. I know the CEO of JP Morgan Chase came out and said that if you couldn't hustle, you couldn't be a hustler, you couldn't hustle, which in the US, by the way, is a good thing. If anyone's from the UK listening, hustling, it does not mean that you're trying to sell drugs in the alley. That's just one of the discussion I had with an English client recently. That's what he thought that meant. But he said, Jamie Dimon said, for hustlers, you have to be in the office. And that's created some blowback from employees with JP Morgan Chase, where they've said, well, listen, all of my work has always been outside of the office. I've been meeting with clients, I've been at clients' locations, I've been in meetings offsite. My work isn't done in the office and has never been done in the office. It hasn't been on video calls as much as it has in the past. But then, of course, in the US, there's also this huge entertainment, hospitality industry, which very much is in person and really has been delayed. And places like Disneyland and other major businesses are still operating at reduced capacity, simply because of pandemic. The pandemic still being what it is, but again, it's very much a patchwork. LA County, there are some restrictions in place, and in Orange County, where Disneyland is located, there are fewer restrictions.
Yeah. But you actually mentioned something that segues into one of our next topics for today's talk, is sort of the entertainment, because you mentioned, and I know you in this context you meant the people working in the entertainment industry, but also sort of the sales guys and the one hustling for the order is actually also that is some of the first questions you are asked as an employer. So what is my expense account? And to that is a different kind of the entertainment industry, because a lot of the network building and the relationship building is a fundamentally a question of entertaining the prospects and your customers. So if as an employer, a future employer, you're not really able to answer, so what is my expense account, that means that you doesn't understand what it actually takes to be a successful hustler, a successful salesperson, or somebody who is whose job it is to actually acquire customers. So what have you experienced on that part, Thomas?
Well, it's spot on. I mean, it's something that's very much part of American sales culture, is entertaining, both taking clients to lunch, to dinners, to events to sponsoring events, hosting things, and there are just a lot of expenses around deepening the relationship, which and the things that we think of as part of the sales funnel, which may in a European context be something that the companies think of as part of an electronic sales funnel, where you market to them and you sign them up for newsletters or whatever it might be. Probably a little bit more sophisticated than signing up for newsletters, but here it's really like you said the phrase boots on the ground.
Exactly.
Going out, meeting with people and saying, hey, Charlotte, I'd like to, I'm started in this new job. I'm working for this exciting European company. I think we're exactly a right fit for you. Let's meet for lunch and we can have a conversation about this and do it invite a couple of your colleagues as well. Exactly. So then it also becomes then the person on the ground making this evaluation, saying like, well, listen, I'm meeting somebody who is a senior person with this company for lunch. I can't take them to get a sandwich. I mean, I have to take them to a nice place.
Yeah.
And I've had this discussion myself with when I worked for a large European company, and they were constantly looking at my expense account, and they're like, well, how come you spent $150 on lunch? I mean, how many people were at this lunch? What, like 10, 15 people? No, there was just the two of us. But $150. Well, this guy's the executive VP. He's the right hand of the president. He's the guy who makes the decision for very, very large contracts with the company that I was representing. And so paying $150 for lunch was actually a bargain. To have his undivided attention for an hour and a half. And by the way, an American business lunch is not 4 hours either. No. You're lucky if you get an hour and a half. I've had people send me back an email saying, hey, that invitation that you sent for us to meet for lunch, I noticed that you blocked off an hour and a half. Can you just resend that, but for an hour? Because my boss won't be happy if he sees an hour and a half for lunch on my calendar.
Yeah, exactly.
So there are a lot of little intricacies, but spending the money and investing the time, and how you need to think about this is, I'm spending money for a lunch, but really what I'm getting is an hour and a half undivided attention of the person who is either the decision maker or who knows the decision makers.
That is a super good point, Thomas, and all that relationship building is some of the topics we have covered in some of the other things about acquiring your customers and so on and so forth. But this is really understanding why your employees on the US ground might behave entirely different than they will do on Danish ground and on European ground, because the relationship building part is just so important in the United States. So therefore, that is obviously the first question they will ask. So how much can I use for entertainment, which is actually the expense account. But actually also, I think that comes also to a fact that we not always understand the hierarchies in the United States, because sometimes we really need to, either if we have a contact on you can say an operational level in an organization where we want to dig our way upwards in the organization, or we would need to have the CEO, if we are so lucky to have him on our lunch list, to actually dig our ways down in the hierarchy. So I think that is also an expression of how we need to actually how our future salespersons need to build their way through either upwards or downwards in an organization with the US.
And it brings up a minor point that I speak to European companies about a lot, is if you're the chief, if you're the top ranking executive with your company, when you are in the US, you need to have business cards that say you are the chief executive officer.
Yeah.
Or at the very least that you're the president of the company.
Exactly.
If it says on your business card you're the managing director or the general manager, people will want to know how they can get to speak to your boss.
Yeah.
And I've had this discussion, and we've mentioned this many times before, but it's a salient point always.
Yeah. Completely correct. You know, the titles in itself is a different animal as well than we're used to. And in Denmark, we obviously take basically pride in totally removing all titles from business cards and from email signatures and so on and so forth. So therefore, really, we can also only recommend that people actually start reinforcing this, or having two types of email signatures for European or Danish communication and for American communication. And luckily, the technical abilities are allowing us to do that seamlessly. So that's fantastic. But if we actually
no, it also just brings up the point, you know, when you see someone who's in the US whose title is vice president, that doesn't mean that they're the right hand of the president, but they might have a vice president, a senior vice president, an executive vice president, a senior executive vice president, and then still have somebody who is at the C level above all of these people, and you have chief financial, chief operating, chief executive officers. Those are the people who actually run the company, whereas the other people are in, you know, some kind of supervisory position below them.
Exactly.
But the organization may be many levels deep, whereas again, European organizations are much more flat.
Exactly.
Typically,
take pride in that. We'd absolutely take pride in that. But if we actually move down a layer or so, because oftentimes the first person on the ground, because a number of times in for European companies, the salespeople or the ones in charge of actually acquiring the customers are still somebody from Denmark. But then as soon as you establish your company, you would need somebody as an internal inside salesperson, where we also have this picture of a Danish inside salesperson that can basically take over the CEO's role, or at least the export manager's role, if he or she is out for vacation. And then I think I have at least experienced that is the most shocker when a US or a Danish company is hiring a US person in that particular role, because it's completely filled in an entirely different way. Because people on a more operational level in the United States, again, the hierarchies, they need to have their tasks specified on a standard operation procedure type of sheet, and if it's not if they're not assigned to this particular task, then they're just playing Angry Birds all day long. When if they're employed for the receptionist, which is a position that sometimes that is the first role that to fill in the United States, and it's not stipulated on the worksheet for that particular person what they need to do, what are the plans, remove the old magazines from the rack, newspaper rack, and so on and so forth, then they're simply just not doing it. So, and that it creates such a frustration for Danish businesses that this person is not able to do something spontaneously at their own initiative. So share some of your experiences on that note. Thomas, have you experienced that as well?
Oh, yes, most definitely. First of all, though, there is a great article from Harvard University about how companies make major mistakes in hiring. Relatively recently it came out, and it's terrific, and it's very illustrative on how the company should change the approach to hiring people, and perhaps this will lead to getting people who are a little bit more entrepreneurial in their efforts. But yes, absolutely. Employees tend to get pigeonholed and want to get pigeonholed, and one of the things perhaps is just in the differences in our educational system, whereas in the US people are accustomed to, throughout college and even through graduate school, of having tests that are multiple choice. So it's really sort of like you're told, like, it's one of these four things. It's not so much, well, figure out what's important here and write about that. And employees tend to have this long list of things that they're required to do. And I've encountered this where especially in the sales field, people will ask, well, what does it take for me to be successful? How am I going to get, what do I need to do to get my bonuses? And basically, which boxes do I need to check? Okay, so I did this much in sales. I had, these were my expenses, sort of like these 3 boxes. I've checked them. Now I get my bonus. Are you going above and beyond that? Well, I don't need to, because I'm not going to make any more money. I'm not going to get a higher bonus. So I met my requirements at the end of the second week of the month, and like you said, well, now I can play Angry Birds or whatever it is for the rest of the month. And if you have somebody who isn't in contact on a regular basis with people back in Denmark, you don't know what they're doing. Maybe they are playing Angry Birds.
Yeah.
But it's a much harder discussion. One company in particular that I've done a lot of business with, an American company, they didn't have a receptionist. They had a director of first impressions. And so the conversation that they had with that employee was about, what are the first impressions when people walk in, and you're in charge of making sure that whoever walks into our office gets the best first impression. And we really had more like an open discussion with that employee, and they had some great results from that.
That is actually a really good one, the director on first impressions. That I really like that, because it also puts some more you can say responsibility on the people, because again, you have, like I say, I usually use the Americans are born in boxes, they're educated in boxes, and they work in boxes, and they have really hard time getting out of these boundaries and actually do something spontaneous, because also the typical management in the United States is actually completely flabbergasted if somebody is really taking up some initiatives on their own, because then you are met with, but that's really not in your field of responsibility to have an opinion about this, that, or the other subject that you would bring to the table. Equivalent of if you were in Denmark, we have this open door policy, and every CEO welcomes that somebody comes knocking on their door if they see something that is wrong, regardless where in the organization it will take place. But so not in the United States. So therefore, we really need to figure out, and we need to be able to identify these individuals whenever we are hiring for also the lower part of the organization, the operational part of the organization, that we find these Swiss Army knives that can do a little bit of everything, and is not afraid, and is not too, you can say, boxed in the American way of working. But really it takes a lot of management to actually get these individuals motivated to be comfortable going outside the box, and really raise a hand if they see something that can be improved, or because that's what you need when you're starting in the United States. You have new to the market, and you would want every one of your employees to actually raise their hands and come forward with suggestions and so on and so forth. But that really requires a really hard job to find these individuals that have that capacity in them. So yeah.
You need somebody who's more of an entrepreneur, and you bring up an important point also, that if you're new to the market, you need feedback.
Exactly.
And of course, one of the key themes to all of these Tuesday talks that we've done this year is the level of misconception, misunderstanding, misapprehension, lack of understanding. And not to say that the companies are bad at what they do. It's just they're doing it in such a different context, and that European companies coming into the US really need somebody on the ground who can tell them, well, listen, what you're saying is good, but have you thought of it this, or have you thought of doing it in a slightly different way, or maybe focus on a smaller portion of the country or a different portion of the country initially. But then you also bring up a really important point, and I think we've said this several times now: hiring. Hiring people in the US is such a different beast.
Yeah.
And this is something that comes up very frequently. And in fact, I've had this not too long ago. A British company was referred to me, and on a completely unrelated question, they were asking how could they get a business license without paying taxes in California? Well, the answer, first of all, is they don't need a business license, and they can't avoid paying taxes in California. But then the discussion led to me discovering that they have 4 employees in the US. They don't have a business entity in the US, so they don't have a tax ID number. So they can't, in fact, pay taxes. But that also limits their ability to hire people. And I asked this guy that I was talking to, so you have 4 employees. Are they independent contractors? How are they? No, they're full employees. Oh, okay. Well, who drafted their employment agreements? Oh, their contracts, you mean? Not what I meant at all. But they said, oh, the HR department in London. So we distinguish between a contract and an employment agreement. And here we have an employment agreement because we have this concept called at-will employment. And it doesn't mean, as a German company I was talking to, they were like, oh, yes, you can work if you want to. No, it means that you can terminate anyone at any time for any reason or for no reason, so long as it's not an illegal reason. So somebody couldn't come to me and say, Thomas, you're white. We're firing you because you're white. We're terminating you because you're white. You can't say that because that's an illegal reason. But I think one of the things that we discussed in the lead-in to this Tuesday talk was, I used to work at a very large bank, and not my boss, but his boss received a phone call at 4:30 p.m. on a Friday afternoon and said, thanks for your 12 years at the bank. We've closed we've eliminated your position. We're closing your division. We're moving the whole division into another group, and you don't have to come into work anymore. We've just deposited 2 weeks extra salary into your bank account after 12 years. And any Europeans here, feel free to gasp in shock, because obviously that's not what you would be able to do in Europe. And what ended up happening was he was in a completely different, he was in a different location than his normal in the 27th, on the 27th floor of the office tower that had the bank's name on it. And he said, well, what about all my stuff in my office? It's like, don't worry about that. We already hired movers. So they sent several pallets of goods from the office, including the desk lamp, which wasn't his, and the trash cans and bunches of other stuff. They sent it to his house, which arrived, like a few days later. And they were just so efficient. They wanted to make sure that there was absolutely no reason for him to come back to the office at all. He got 2 weeks, not even a severance pay, but it was really like they gave him 2 weeks notice. And then they just paid him that notice money in advance. And they told him, you know what, during the next 2 weeks, you don't even have to come into the office, but we've eliminated your position. Thanks. Goodbye. On a Friday afternoon.
But that's basically also, and close the phone, obviously, as well. If he had any, now it's a bank, so it's a little bit different, but a Danish company who was actually doing sort of the same. They wanted definitely to get rid of the US country manager, and they did not do that. They said, yeah, you have like 3 months of severance, and we of course expect you to work, because that is sort of the position where we come from. We expect people to work with the work ethic they have done up until now, because obviously we have our flexicurity, and it's just a question of this individual going out and finding another job. But what happened in these 3 months, the American country manager, he was actually just calling around to all the customers and said, yeah, the company is closing and pulling out of the market. And they, to this day, is still actually repairing on this damaged reputation they got from this angry country manager. So it is really somehow like you see it in the movies, like the security comes into the office.
Most definitely.
You can take the picture of your children and then goodbye and thank you for this time. And you should do so, because that is sort of in the context of American work ethics, and also if you are having, which you most likely will have as a Danish or a European employer, you will have people with the customer contact. So most definitely. But on the other hand, you can also, as an American employer, whereas we as Danish businesses, we would like to inform our employees about everything, all details that goes on in the company, and make sure we're everybody pulling in the same direction. And sometimes we over inform, and that Americans are also not used to that. They're not used to being involved in it to this extent that we oftentimes would like them to do in Denmark, and people can actually show up at their employer with this sign on the door saying, hey, I'm sorry guys, we filed for bankruptcy yesterday, so sorry, you're unemployed from now on. And that would obviously never, it's unimaginable in Denmark. You would not show up at your doorstep at your employer and for not until then understand that the company has been filed for bankruptcy.
Well, it's funny because now we talk about business development, and in taking people out to lunch. I know how this happens because it didn't happen to me. I wasn't the employee, but I was taking out an important business partner. We were going out for lunch, and the lunch restaurant where we would ordinarily meet, I was having trouble booking. I was calling, and it just was going to voicemail, and it was very strange. So I booked at a restaurant next door. And as it turns out, we got to the restaurant next door, and I said, I was trying to book it, but it looks like they're closed, but they're not usually closed on Mondays. Oh no, they're closed.
They're closed as closed.
But they're not usually closed on Mondays. Like, no, they're closed permanently.
Yeah.
And he said employees had come in, and they'd actually come in for work that morning, thinking that they were going to work, and the doors were just locked. Yeah. And there was no sign on the door. They started making phone calls, and it was only then that they realized the company had actually folded.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, my dad owned a restaurant in United States as well, and some of his employees, he just pushed the key under the door one day, and that was his master chef, and he didn't apparently show up for work. Never seen him ever since. So you can say the trust between employer and employees are at a completely different level than we're used to in Denmark. But what about, because the other day I got the question from one of the companies I work with, but it doesn't seem, we are seeing all these fantastic companies, Google, and they have nap stations and table pool and whatnot. So what about it? It doesn't resonate with the picture that I'm drawing from a more hierarchy built organization, and more so backwards thinking and old fashioned. And so what about all these modern American corporations that we see all the time in the news and on television? So what's up with that? What's the difference?
Well, one of the things that you have to take into consideration also is when you're looking at the tech industry. One of the comparisons that I'm quite familiar with is between Silicon Valley and the tech environment in Southern California, is just that the average tenure of lower level employees in the tech industry in Silicon Valley is about 6 months. And so they compete on not just on salary, but on all these other benefits that you have to offer all those things, because if Google offers it, then Facebook has to offer it as well. And they just have to offer that, not just to keep employees, but to attract employees. And even now, one of the things that they do in the tech industry, they don't look at individual employees coming in for to solve particular problems, but they look at groups of people. So they're like, if you're with a team, you may be the leader of this team, but we want to bring on your entire team, because if a key person decides to leave from that team, well, we want to have the other 4 people of this 5-person team who's still going to stay after this key person has been lured away to one of the other tech giants.
But I guess yeah.
No, I mean, and I'm just going to say, I mean, it also just depends. Like, if you're looking at the tech industry, it's a very different employment scheme from someone who is in an organization where they're looking to create a career either with that company or with that industry. And if you're so we focus on environmental sustainability. If you're an engineer and you work in the water industry, you're not likely to be lured away by Google. But you might be lured away by another water company, and it's a completely different context. It's more about the other benefits. And so one of the things that I was surprised about when I first moved to the US from Denmark was people would tell me this: oh, I got a great new job, I've got great benefits, and it was healthcare. It wasn't that you got a car, it wasn't that you got more vacation, better access to bonuses, or any other thing like that. It's like, I have Kaiser. And I had to ask, what's Kaiser? Well, Kaiser's healthcare. And of course, in Europe, we take these things for granted, and there are just different benefits from in different industries that you need to look at. But as a European company, healthcare is something that you really need to look at and you really need to be aware of. It's always tied to employment, and you can only get very, very expensive healthcare if you don't have it through your employer.
Exactly. But the segue out of the you can say these, if you can say, fancy employment, the tech companies of Silicon Valley, from my personal point of view, I would say maybe 90% of the average Danish company going to the United States, they will never, the environment they will meet will be so far away from what is happening at the fancy tech industries in Silicon Valley, that is not what they will meet, and that is not the employment pool that they will draw from whenever they are going to hire people in United States. So just expect, like anything else in the United States, it's so diverse. You have such a diverse pool of people, and coming with so many different expectations and so many different backgrounds and frames of reference. But most likely they will not be formed by the tech industry and what we see whenever we are reading about fancy companies from the United States.
And bear in mind, when we're talking about diversity, there's also like a diverse legal framework. So if you're looking to hire employees in California, that's California law. If you're looking if it's in Kansas, it's Kansas law, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And the law is different in each state, and you should absolutely hire an employment attorney who can help you draft a proper employment agreement. And especially if you have more than one employee, you need to have an employee handbook that outlines the policies, because you can't expect your U.S. employees to have any idea of what your employment policies are at your headquarters in Europe. And even if they did, and even if they were in English, you should still plan on formulating a U.S. Employee policy that's based on the areas in which your employees are located.
Exactly. I could not agree more with you. But Thomas, what does it to, because we have a not even a minute left, but we're talking about all these things that can go wrong. What about the motivation? How do you motivate people that are so comes with such a different frame of reference, and with whom you are in not in daily contact, and you don't see, and you can't hang around at the Friday bar and so on and so forth, things that we enjoy in Denmark? What are we going to do, and how can we make sure that they are working for us and not venturing off playing Angry Birds and just cashing the paycheck? So what are we going to do? I mean, how are we going to motivate these people?
Well, one thing, of course, is always money. So bonuses and a direct way to making more money and to getting better benefits, but also to really educate people on how they're making a difference in their job, I think is increasingly important. And it's one of the things I see that especially larger American companies are not as good at. And one of the things that I'm sure you've heard about as well is the problems with the Great Resignation. I've heard some news media call this, where people are just are resigning, are leaving jobs, and where some employers are resentful and saying, well, it's because the government is giving people money and then they just don't want to work. I disagree with that rather vehemently, because the amount of money that people are given is very little. But I think one of the things that I've read about and heard about in many different contexts from reasonable people that I find persuasive is that people want to have a little bit more meaning in their jobs. And I think it's one of the things that European companies do better than American companies is to give that sense of meaning from your job. But I think, in this day and age where we have a lot of remote technology, it's easy enough to have the communication with with your employees that are in the US with this technology. Bear in mind, of course, the time differences, but it's easy enough. I mean, it's like, I hear this where people say, well, the East Coast is closer, or people are more like us. But you can have a meeting with somebody on the West Coast at 8 o'clock in the morning. On the West Coast, it's 5 p.m. in Central European time. It's 4 p.m. in the UK. It could be at 7:30 in the morning.
Yeah,
it's not a completely unreasonable time. But on the other hand, I've heard of European companies who are like, well, we're meeting at noon Central European time. Well, that's 3 a.m. in California. And if you have an employee in California and you're saying, well, you know what, tough luck, you have to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, they're not going to stay with your company for very long. So you do have to take these things into consideration, but you can keep people engaged using a lot of the new technology that's now also much more accepted.
Exactly. And also a fact that, regardless of what level, regardless if it's the director of first impressions or the VP of business development, sales, area sales managers, I think across the board, Americans that are not measured, that are not incentivized by the next week's targets or the next quarter's earnings, or being part of building that castle instead of sitting there with that little one brick. Americans are used to being measured, and like you said, and used to be pop quiz every week. So an American that is not in some shape or form measured against some goals that the person and the individuals have been a part of identifying themselves, they will fiddle out and they will disappear between your hands, and you will wonder what are they doing. But somebody you can keep motivated by really incentivize them and rewarding them for reaching the goals they have helped identify themselves. That is an employee that you can keep forever, basically, because the advantage of working with a European company is just so much higher than, you can say, the average American employer. So yes.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned a good point before about the things that we like to communicate from a European company, and that we make sure that we communicate things that are then important, that we communicate that, listen, you met this goal and it's important because we reach this target, or we engage with this important client. So even if it's not a specific financial goal that created a bonus, it may be something that's important in a different context. And those are the things where like you said, American employees are not accustomed to getting the level of detail that certainly that one would expect in a European company, or that one is accustomed to in a European company. But you can still use some of these things to say, well, you contributed financially, but you also contributed in these other ways, and here's how.
Exactly. Super. I think we could go on forever, and I think
yes,
actually there are so many subcategories under the employment. So I have this feeling it's not the last time we have touched on this, and also because increasingly for European companies, for Danish companies to actually reach all these fantastic orders and be part of all these trillions of dollars that is pumped into the American economy, then boots on the ground, local content, local employees are increasingly more important. So being an employer on the US market for a Danish company is very likely to be something you need to consider in the next years to come. So I have the idea that employment is not the last time that we're touching on. So if you have
it's an important topic that's, like you said, recurring. It's a constantly on our minds here.
Exactly. So if also the attendees have some questions that you would like us to talk about in one of these Tuesday talks, then don't hesitate to shoot Thomas or myself an email. Reply to whenever I'm sending you this the link to the recording of this, so you can revisit at any given time you want, or share it with colleagues that doubts whatever you're saying about having a US staff on payroll. So I hope you will be able to share some insights with these people. But I want to let you have a walk with the dog. He
she wants to go out, that's for sure.
wants to go out. Okay, good. So fantastic. And thank you so very much to our listeners. And I hope you have gained some insights and some aha moments here this afternoon. And we will keep you in the loop for our next Tuesday talk.
Thank you so much. Thanks for listening, guys.
Absolutely. Have a wonderful day and enjoy your Thanksgiving holiday.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye-bye.